so is our description of how interstellar civilizations, extraterrestrial civilizations capable of reaching Earth, have technological systems that interface transdimensionally with consciousness and thought. And one of the things that has to be made very clear is that this is not just any kind of random thought. It's very important, and this is one of the things we go to in great depth in the new book that is coming out this week, Contact, Countdown to Transformation, which we will be able to get at disclosureproject.org. It chronicles the 17, 18 years of experiences we've had out under the stars making contact with these civilizations, and more importantly, how that's done. And this goes back to the experiences that I had as a young man when I was 18 years of age and started having this kind of contact that was deliberate, using consciousness and higher states of consciousness and thought as the chief operating system, if you want to look at it that way, or the chief paradigm, central paradigm for contact. And the reason for it is that any civilization that is capable of going faster than the speed of light, when they do so, they're moved instantly into a dimension that the mystics in the ancient times would have called the etheric or astral component of the cosmos. And they're not solid matter any longer, and their communication systems similarly are not being transmitted at the electromagnetic frequencies of the speed of light, which is 186,000 miles per second. Obviously, this is something that could not be achieved if you're talking about the distances between star systems, never mind galaxies. I mean, for example, the Andromeda galaxy is 2.5 million light years away, and that's the closest galaxy to the Milky Way. And if you were communicating with something that was at the speed of light, it would take 2.5 million years to get a signal there, and then another 2.5 million years to get a signal back. And this would be 5 million years in terms of Earth years for just a simple two-way conversation. Taking our own galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy, of which our sun and our solar system is just one of billions of star systems in our Milky Way galaxy. Our Milky Way galaxy by itself is 100,000 light years across. And a light year, of course, is a measurement of distance, and it's how much distance light covers at 186,000 miles every second. So if you were in a very nearby star system, say one that was only 1% of the way across our Milky Way galaxy and 1,000 light years from here, if you were to try to communicate even with that star system, to do a two-way conversation would be 1,000 years to send the message there at the speed of light, which would be a cell phone or a radio signal, and another 1,000 years for them to answer, and that's if they answered instantaneously. So that's the time since the birth of Christ for you to say, hello, how are you, and for them to answer back, oh, I'm doing very well, thank you. And this was part of the conversation I had when I was briefing President Clinton's first CIA director on this, and that is that the people who are looking at this subject from a scientific point of view have to step out of the current linear and light-based paradigm. By light-based, I mean the speed of light. Everything's being looked at the speed of light, and this is what the so-called SETI project is doing, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, where they're using telescopes and radio telescopes and things of this sort. But they're only going to be able to detect signals that are traveling in that spectrum of energy, which is traveling at the speed of light, which in reality, if we're talking about civilizations that are here, and there's abundant proof through the Disclosure Project, you can go to disclosureproject.org and see this proof, we're already being visited. So then the question becomes, if they are here, how did they get here, and how are they communicating back home? And therefore, what might be their basic scientific paradigm that they're using that we should understand in order to make contact with them? And that's the crux of what we want to talk about today, because that's really the most important thing to understand for anyone who wants to be able to comprehend these civilizations, but also comprehend how we might make contact with them. While they're in the materialized form in a linear spacecraft that's in space-time and is solid, and they could have effects that are linear and electromagnetic and what have you, but their central paradigm is going to be one based on a lot of the information that the Vedas contain, and since we're on the World Puja network, we're talking about consciousness and higher states of consciousness, would be very Vedic in their origins and universal in their origins, and the understanding that consciousness is the ultimate quantum hologram through which, from which everything is manifesting, but also from which communication systems would be operating. And so these extraterrestrial communication devices, even if they're solid materialized objects, the energy forms that they're transmitting through are transdimensional and cross beyond the speed of light into this non-local component of thought and thought forms and consciousness and other energy forms that are very specific, even though to modern science we may think, well, something like a ghost or an astral body or a thought body is something that isn't quantifiable. It is quantifiable if you're a civilization that understands interstellar travel, because you cross through those dimensions as you go from one point in space to this point in space and back. So that understanding is very, very key. It's really the foundation of understanding what we're doing at CSETI.org, the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, to make contact with these civilizations. And this is really the specialty that I've tried to bring to this, because before I was an emergency doctor, I was a meditation teacher and spent many years studying the Vedas and the Sanskrit teachings and the sciences of consciousness and all the ways in which it can be applied. And what I discovered when I was about 18 years of age and I had contact with these extraterrestrials is that they are utilizing technological devices that are interfacing with very directed thought emanating from a quiet and calm level of awareness, a very centered level of awareness, and that it is something which is a routine means of communication for them, not something extraordinary or even mystical. And I think that this is something that if we begin to contemplate, it makes complete sense. And this is one of the things I had to explain when I was briefing President Clinton's CIA director and the CIA director's wife, Sue Woolsey, who was Dr. Woolsey was the chief operating officer of the National Academy of Sciences, asked me, well, how are they communicating across these vast distances of space? And so we had to get into this entire conversation of transdimensional conscious universe that is the central understanding needed. And so I think it's really important that we have a full understanding of this, so we all understand not only how we can make contact, but all the unconventional, shall I say, ways in which these extraterrestrial civilizations will contact us. And I think that's really very important for us to understand. And this is part of what we recount in this new book. We're very excited. We just about 5 minutes ago had the delivery of the first shipment of them here at our home. And I just looked at the actual three-dimensional hard copy of this book for the first time, literally 90 seconds before I started this radio interview. And it's just a beautiful book. And it recounts all these experiences from our team for the last 17 years all over the world. So those of you who are interested in reading about that, it also has with it a DVD that just came today also that has all the images of these trans-dimensional forms and craft that have appeared around us and over us and in our field and out in space around us. So that comes with the book, and you can get that at disclosureproject.org. And I would recommend that people do so if they really want to understand how we're doing this contact and all the ways that it appears. So that's really what we want to focus on today, is this whole concept of thought, consciousness, and contact, and what it means to enter into a state of what I've called coherent thought sequencing to make contact with these visitors.
We find that this happens all the time to us in the field, and it happens sometimes intentionally. If we see an object in the sky, we'll ask it maybe out loud or think to it, if you're an ET craft, please do something anomalous, and they might, if it is, it might do a little zigzag or flash us or something. But it happens unconsciously as well, and that's normally when we're in a meditation, and suddenly, and this has happened so many times, we'll just so-called happen to look and open our eyes right at the precise time to see a craft coming down, which happened in Shasta about a month ago, and to both me and Dr. Greer when we saw this amazing large chevron-shaped craft kind of float twirling down. And it happened, for example, to the man who got the first video taping of the giant triangular formation that came over in Mount Shasta. We were in the middle of a meditation, and he had a thought in his head that said, "Look up," and he looked up and saw that. So these communications come to us all the time.
Right, and in fact, when back in the early beginnings of CSETI, we took an expedition to Popo near the big, huge volcano outside Mexico City, and we were out there very late at night on a very high plain at the base of the volcano, and I was there with Sherry Adamak and two other people, and we were all in a very deep meditative state, and I was almost in a hypnagogic state. When we'd been traveling, I was very tired, and I was floating along, and suddenly, very clearly, a thought was directed towards me that said, "Look up, sit up, and look to the right." And that's exactly what it said, sit up and look to the right. I did so, and there was this massive triangular craft, completely and fully materialized, that was coming from the volcano towards us, and it was about 800 feet to 1,000 feet across on each side of the triangle. So it was like 3 football fields across on each side of this massive triangle. And it was moving towards us, and I began to signal to it, and it turned and came right over towards us. And then it made a circle, sort of circled us, and it was only maybe 200 or 300 feet in the air. And as it then departed going towards the city of Puebla, I signaled to it one last time, and the whole receding edge of it, the whole side of the triangle that was facing us, it was now moving away from us, lit up and signaled precisely back to us in a communication. Now, while that was going on, all of us were bilocating through consciousness, and we're on board the craft communicating with the pilot. And the beings that were on this craft were these tall, luminous white beings, very glowing. And I remember specifically seeing the occupants, and we were communicating on that level while this craft was fully materialized in three-dimensional space-time and while we're signaling to it. But the entire process of it started because we had entered into a deep state of consciousness, and we were remote viewing their location and sending out sort of a searchlight beam of awareness showing them where we were. And this is part of what I want to get into, is this whole concept of coherent thought sequencing. Now, I want to point out that if you go to disclosureproject.org, there is a series of 2 different CDs that have meditation CDs. One is the mantra meditation CD that teaches the meditation approach. The other one is one that actually goes through this coherent thought sequencing training that trains people how to use a deeper state of consciousness and then enter into remote viewing of the object, the ET object, no matter where it is in space. It could be in the air, it could be out in deep space, it could be in another galaxy. And then to coherently use thought to show exactly where we're located. And what I want to describe here is part of what this technique entails. And it's something that we'll be doing at this conference at Rio Rico that begins just in about a week. We're going to be in Arizona with about 180 to 200 people, and we're every night going to be on the roof of this big resort making contact using lasers and electromagnetic tones we send out into space. But we're also going to be doing a group meditative process where we go into quiet, unbounded awareness and then begin to remote view deep space. And then once we see an object in space with our conscious mind through the remote viewing process, we then connect to the spacecraft or to the ET beings and introduce ourselves as ambassadors from Earth to their civilization and invite them to come. And what you do at that point is that you show them our galaxy, our solar system. You zoom into the Earth. You zoom into North America, if that's where you're located. You zoom into the Arizona desert. You zoom into the area southeast of Tucson, Arizona, where Rio Rico is, and you zoom into the exact location where the group is doing its contact work. And you do this on a continuous streaming of thought basis. And that is done for anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour at a time. And that streaming of thought, that coherent thought that is sequencing and guiding them in like a landing light at an airport, but it's doing it through the sort of a column of awareness and thought connecting to the ET craft and guiding them in. This is the technique that we teach because it's very, very effective, and it's what the ETs that I had contact with in 1973 when I was hiking up in the mountains of North Carolina, up in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and had my contact that I talk about in the book Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge. That's the experience that I had. I was in a deep state of consciousness. I had a meditation. I went into unbounded mind. I then, afterwards, had clear contact consciously with an ET, and there was actually one that materialized physically right beside me on the mountain. At that point, I then dematerialized and ended up on a spacecraft where we kind of co-created this whole technique of contact. And it was an amazing experience because basically I think the reason that I had this experience is that a few months earlier I had had a near-death experience where in that experience I had a full sort of God consciousness and cosmic consciousness experience. And they knew, the ETs must have known, that experience stayed with me because I later learned meditation techniques using mantras. And I began practicing that very, very regularly and very devotedly. And began on a daily basis having these sort of experiences of expanded states of consciousness. And then this contact happened. And I was told they were very interested in a young boy, because at the time I had just turned 18. I had my near-death experience when I was 17 in the spring of 1973. And I turned 18 on June 28, 1973. What happened is that these extraterrestrial civilizations were very interested in the fact that there was someone such as myself interested in outer space. You know, my uncle had put the first man on the moon, designed the lunar module. The senior project engineer at Grumman that built the lunar module. And I had had a sighting and contact with ETs when I was 8 or 9, and now I've had that experience. So then I think what happened is that they realized that I had the experiential foundation for understanding how contact can be made on a not just happenstance basis where you just happen across something, but where you make it happen, where you actually connect with them and vector them in and invite them in for a purposeful encounter that is planned. And that's what we're doing, and we have been doing since 1990 with the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And you'll see at cseti.org/contact that this is going to be the big focus of what we're doing at this conference in Arizona beginning on the 24th of this month, October, where we're going to be going out there and doing an experiment with mass consciousness with a couple of hundred people entering into that state of consciousness and making contact with these civilizations. And we're going to have a very high-powered laser, and we're going to have these electromagnetic tones, and then we're going to have the entire group going into this deep meditative state, then go into the remote viewing mode and see where the ET spacecraft are that are in space or around the Earth or perhaps even within the Earth, because they do have places at times where they're actually in mountains and underneath the surface of the Earth or under the surface of the ocean, and then guide them to that location at Rio Rico, Arizona, while we're there for those 3 nights. And Colin Andrews will be with us doing this, as well as Dr. Ted Loder and Dr. Len Katai, who has had contact in the Phoenix area with the Phoenix Lights. And the entire senior CSETI contact team will be there. So those of you who can join us, you're welcome to come to that or to some of the upcoming events that we're doing in Joshua Tree, California, up in the high desert of California. Joshua Tree National Park is a place we've been going through since 1996, and we're going to have a whole week-long expedition for a much smaller group, maybe around 40 people, out under the stars in Joshua Tree that will be happening in November. I don't have the dates here in front of me, but you can go to
the week of the 15th.
Those dates. And And we'll also be doing just a one-day training workshop in Costa Mesa, California, also in November. So
14th.
These are opportunities for people to learn how we're doing this and what we're doing, and to receive the meditation instruction and understand how it is they can become ambassadors from Earth to these civilizations. And the central operating paradigm is understanding consciousness, higher states of consciousness, the unbalanced state of mind, and then how to then awaken within that quiet, centered state of mind, see where the ET craft are and what they look like, and connect to their communication system, and then using this coherent thought sequencing, actually connect to them and then show them, zoom in exactly to your location. It's very, very effective. Of course, it presupposes of people being able to enter into a quiet meditative state, which is the first thing you have to learn to do, and that's why there's such an important emphasis on learning how to enter into quiet meditative consciousness, and then from there being able to remote view, seeing with consciousness into deep space, and then from there being able to use an active protocol of guiding and vectoring these ET beings and their spacecraft onto our site. And once you learn it, it becomes easier and easier to do with practice. And people have been having experiences where literally craft have appeared at their homes, in their backyards. They've been on. We have groups that are, small groups of 3 or 4 or 5 people who are now all over the world practicing this, who are sending us reports and also images and photographs of events that are happening. And so what you find is that these extraterrestrial civilizations are very eager to respond, so long as the person doing it is doing it without prejudice and fear, and understand the concepts of transdimensional reality and these basic concepts of meditation and remote viewing and coherent thought sequencing, those 3 components that we use in the training process. And by doing so, almost anyone can learn to be able to make contact with these beings and to be ready for contact. And they can appear in a million different ways. Interestingly, we had one man that came last year to one of the events, and he told a very almost hilarious story where he had gotten the CD of the meditation and also the CD for the training of how to remote view and do the coherent thought sequencing, and he was practicing that and then fell asleep. And when he did that, his wife went into a lucid dream state where she actually had contact and then went out of her body in an out-of-body experience and saw that there was an ET craft hovering right outside their house and actually just above ground level, and that she had this prolonged encounter with the ET beings who had been called in by her husband. Now, her husband didn't recall during the dream state any of this, but she, who was not practicing the protocols, had this amazing lucid dream encounter. And he asked me, he said, well, how is it that I did it, but she got? I said, well, because the 2 of you are together, you're unified, and she was just more awake in her dream. You may have experienced it and not recalled it. And this brings up another big issue, and that is a lot of people get very literalistic and materialistic in their view. And certainly we have had extraterrestrial spacecraft and physical beings fully materialize in the flesh with, the metallic craft, and it's humming and it's spinning and it's leaving electromagnetic effects around us and what have you. On the other hand, it's possible, and I think this is probably very, very common, that these extraterrestrial civilizations will stay in a transdimensional state and interact just on the etheric and astral level, which for humans, aside from visualization, the most profound way that most humans have that is in the lucid dream, where they're awake within the dream, conscious within the dream, and it's full color, and you're floating along or flying or whatever it is, and that lucid dream state is very real. It's as real as the physical dimension, but it is the transdimensional etheric or astral component of conscious light that is very much related to the form that an extraterrestrial spacecraft enters into when it resonates and makes a quantum leap faster than the speed of light and faster than the speed of electrons and matter into this etheric form. And so what you find is that many people will have their contact begin to happen in the lucid dream state. And this is something which people in the West who tend to discount the spiritual state will discount those experiences. I said, well, no, don't discount them at all, because this is part and parcel of the experience, and that interstellar civilizations, if they're going from one point in space all the way to Earth and back, they're traversing this non-local, non-linear, etheric and astral realm as easily as we would communicate with a cell phone or move across the skies in a jet or a rocket. I should say more easily. And so this is why it's really critical that people understand that the conscious state and the lucid dream state are all part and parcel of this experience, and part of what we train people to understand and also to utilize. That when we're on these expeditions, we emphasize that even as you're going to sleep at night, you can do a protocol to make contact and then allow the contact to continue during the dream state.
You've often told the story of that Disclosure Project witness who was having an out-of-body experience and popped into an ET craft.
Oh, yeah, there was a man who's actually an aerospace scientist who worked for Lockheed Skunk Works and actually knew Kelly Johnson, who was the founder of the Skunk Works, and had worked with him back in the 60s, and Ian actually was still working there in the 70s, and had invented quite a few things, and he was someone who had become interested in these transdimensional aspects and had become a student of the Rosicrucian School. And part of what they teach, I've never taken that course, but they teach apparently the Rosicrucians teach this whole concept of astral projection and being able to travel with your body of light and what have you. And so he was studying to do that, and he had never successfully had an experience, however. And his teacher finally came to him one day and said, look, you're really ready to do this. You just have to let go and let it happen. And you just got to know that you can do it. And so that afternoon, this gentleman, this scientist who worked for Lockheed Skunk Works, tried it, and lo and behold, he had this full sort of astral experience where his subtle body launched up out of the physical body up through the ceiling of his house and the roof of his house and went up into the atmosphere. And he actually saw and then bumped into an extraterrestrial spacecraft that was up in the atmosphere that was apparently shifted into that realm, into the etheric astral realm that was the same as the realm of his body. And at the time, he called me. He was not so much interested in being a witness for the Disclosure Project, which he subsequently did become, but he was more interested in understanding what happened, and that is that when he approached this craft, he bumped into it, and it moved it. And he says, but I was not in my physical body. I was floating in my astral body. How did that move an extraterrestrial spacecraft? It clearly was a large disc-shaped craft, and it had these beams on board. And then he popped into the inside of the craft, and he said that the ETs looked at him like, my God, why don't you watch where you're going, like it was some kind of cosmic faux pas. And it was rather hilarious. And with that, he became so sort of unnerved because he felt very embarrassed that he had clumsily slammed into and then gone into this craft, that he went straight back into his body. And he didn't understand how, first of all, they could see him in his astral body, and B, how his astral body could hit the craft or interface with the craft and make it actually not move it much, but just sort of jolt it a little bit. And I said, well, look, when an extraterrestrial civilization travels through interstellar space, and even when they're hovering in our atmosphere and sometimes hovering on the ground in front of you, they don't have to be materialized like a 747 or a car. They can be in this energy form, that's this etheric, astral sort of form of energy, which may not even be visible to the naked eye, and you could walk straight through it and not know it was there. But in this dimension where there is thought density and where there is astral form, if they're resonating in that form, it is of a similar density to your astral body and can interact with it, and they can see you and you can see them. And this is why many people have had these amazing contact experiences within the meditative state and within the astral lucid dreaming state of the lucid dream, where you're awake within the dream and flying with your body somewhere. And I have personally had many of these. So I think that this makes complete sense once you understand the absolute necessity of being a transdimensionally competent civilization in order to go from one star system to another, that there's no possibility that you're going to stay in a physical, materialized form and go from one star system to another that's thousands of light years away. You are, by definition, going to have mastered these transdimensional aspects of not only transportation, but also communication. And when you do that, you've crossed what I call gone through the crossing point of light. And when you go through the crossing point of light, which is also the crossing point of matter in terms of the speed of electrons in solid matter, you've entered into this multiverse, this transdimensional universe that has within it the astral and etheric components, which is very, very related to the meditative lucid visualization state and the lucid dream state. And this is why, if you understand that and begin to understand the importance of the science of consciousness and the Vedic teachings of consciousness and higher states of consciousness and all the what are called siddhis, S-I-D-D-H-I-S, these abilities or powers that go along with consciousness, such as remote viewing, teleportation, levitation, dematerialization and rematerialization, bilocation. All of these are things that go with the development of states of consciousness, but they are very much related to interstellar civilizations technologies, because in order for them to even exist as a trans-dimensional and interstellar civilization, they have had to fully understand what we're discussing here today. And I think that this is why it's so exciting for me, where I can see where the electromagnetic sciences, the anti-gravity sciences, the higher states of consciousness and the knowledge of the Vedas and the knowledge of the Puja, since we're on the World Puja Network, we may as well bring that in. And all of that comes together at this nexus where you have this meeting of understanding of where these sciences, both that are in some sense, of course, material, but also that are transdimensional, come together. And that what's wonderful about this, when you think about it, is that folded within the reality of each human being is the conscious body, the etheric and astral body, and the ability to utilize that for communication, for travel, for remote viewing and visualization, and for contact. And so, yes, you can spend $1 billion on a NASA space program, but you might be more likely to make confirmed contact with these civilizations if you spend some time developing your own consciousness and your own skills in meditation and remote viewing and in astral transdimensional reality. And that's what we train people to do, and that's what we're doing on this expedition, beginning in about a week out in the desert of Arizona, but also that on these week-long trainings like at Joshua Tree National Park, where we've had so much amazing contact. That's one of the really chief things that we focus on.
Another thing that we've found on Sea City expeditions is that the ETs like to see teamwork among humans, and they'll often give several different people in our group a different telepathic piece of the puzzle that when we start sharing together and everybody talking about what they've received in the meditation or what they've telepathically been communicated, we find that these puzzle pieces fit together into something really important.
Absolutely. And that's another thing that I think frequently we will see that the ETs, in an attempt to ascertain if the group is coherent and unified, will give one person part of one image or message and another person another. And some of the most important contacts we have had have been a consequence of our doing exactly that. and then sharing the images or the impressions or the information that we get through consciousness. And this is a really key point that years ago I met some people who were in a classified project who were trying to investigate the whole UFO question and the ET question, and they were sent out, and I think they had something like 7 different parabolic communication dishes, and they were trying to do some things with this, and suddenly each of them started getting different bits of data, which did not make any sense one-on-one, but when they openly shared with each other what each of them got, it made complete sense and made a message. And I think that this was a way for the ETs to say we like to work with people who are unified, and we like to work with people who are coherent and working within an ethical framework of trustworthiness and transparency. And I think that is one of the key things that we have found, is that when we go out into the stars and do this, is that we tell people that they really need to share whatever impressions they're getting, even if it seems like it makes no sense at all. Because when you get 3 or 4 of them together, or 2 of them, often it will make complete sense. But by itself it may not. And this is one way that the extraterrestrial civilizations sort of test a group or investigate whether a group is ready for a further level of contact.
It never fails. The ETs teach us, and they are so creative in thinking of new ways to communicate with us. And that's one of the things that's so amazing about this new book, is the enormous variety of ways that the ETs communicate with us.
Well, yeah, there are literally thousands of different ways, and that's what's chronicled in these, it's about 455 pages, and then this DVD that goes with it. By the way, the DVD that goes with it comes free with the book when you order it, disclosureproject.org, and this DVD actually has the images and also the beeping tones and the sounds and the Orion transmissions that accompany the contact what we've had. And what we've done with this book is not to have an exhaustive thing of everything that's happened. That would be probably 20,000 pages, but it's to give some of the highlights of the experiences that we have had, and not just my experiences, but our whole team that's been on this. I mean, it's Dr. Loader and Linda and Debbie Foch and Trudy Geiker and many of the people who've been on these expeditions all over the world for many, many years, since the 1990s. We gathered together a couple of years ago, almost 3 years ago now, in Palm Springs to just share these, and we made a tape recording of everyone's experiences as we shared, and then these got transcribed and have become now this new chronicle of the CSETI experience. And the book is called Contact: Countdown to Transformation. And the reason it's called that is because our contact has been accelerating at such a degree over the last year and a half or two, since the original contact, Orion contact, happened in 2007 in Joshua Tree 2 years ago, that we're quite certain that we're in the final countdown to massive global open contact and the transformation of Earth from a very dysfunctional planet at this stage to one that will be functioning coherently and will be living peacefully on this planet and going into space peacefully. And we'll also be using these very advanced concepts in science and technology to provide for the people of the Earth materially, including the development of zero-point or over-unity energy devices that generate energy from the fabric of space-time, and that also allow for eventually anti-gravity, or so-called electromagnetogravitic systems, which is how a UFO moves around, and when it's fully materialized. And that allows for basically this sort of levitation effect by canceling the effect of mass in an object, so that it looks like it is just floating weightlessly. And this has to do with some very advanced concepts in electromagnetism and magnetic spin and what have you, and frequencies and resonant frequencies and harmonics. But we understand qualitatively how these things work. We would still, what we're trying to do through the OrionProject.org is to either identify someone who has one of these things built or raise the funds so we can begin to develop these energy generation systems so our civilization can begin to transition out of oil and into a sustainable world. But the fundamental understanding of what this new book, Contact, Countdown to Transformation, brings is how to make contact and all the ways that Linda was talking about that they have made contact with us, which are just almost countless. And every single time we go out and make contact with these ET visitors, there's some new manifestation of their presence, some new way in which they do it.
Right. It's always really delightful to discover a new way that they manifest. And not only do we receive reports from people all around the world who are using the CSETI protocols and having experiences, but recently there have been a couple of men actually that have been on the trainings, and one of them was driving home across a few states from the Denver or Crestone, Colorado training we had, and another was driving in California, and they were playing. There's on the Cosmic Consciousness Meditation CD set. There's one clip that's about 20. It's about a 20-minute loop of the toning of the mantra, and they were playing that in their cars as they were driving, and an ET craft came and followed them for quite a distance in both these cases.
Right.
Just by them being in that meditative state by repeating the mantra.
That's right, and people are having this happen before they come, when they get the CDs with the meditation, and after they leave, and every other thing. And I think that one of the encouraging things that I see about all this is that we're getting more and more people who are understanding the fact that anyone can do this. That this is not something that requires for me to be there at all. That basically, I experienced these things when I was young, and I've sort of systematized the understanding and teaching how to do it. But that anyone who is awake and is a human being can experience the deep level of consciousness that is the source of our being and the source of our own conscious mind, and then remote view and make contact and use this very clear, coherent thought sequencing approach to see where these ET craft and these civilizations are, and then invite them or guide them into your location by imaging exactly where you're located and asking them to appear within the framework of universal peace. And, I emphasize we don't do this for our entertainment or curiosity. People who want to do this because they're just wanting to have some dolphins at SeaWorld jump through a hoop for them are going to be very, very disappointed. The ETs are not going to cooperate with such a banal and really childish motivation. They are, however, going to respond to anyone who is sincere and I should say clear in their intent and pure-hearted about it, and also free of fear and prejudice. That's the hardest thing I have found, is that anyone who's looked into the UFO subject at all has unfortunately incorporated into their worldview all kinds of Manichaean us versus them, good and bad alien fantasies and what have you, that is just really an extrapolation of or a projection of the crisis on Earth into space. And unfortunately, we're not going to change things by recapitulating the mistakes of the last 10,000 years on Earth. We're going to have to really step forward with a higher state of awareness and a new consciousness and a new approach where we understand that all conscious life is emanating from the divine being, and in the true sense of the compassion of the Buddha, of the oneness of understanding of where we all originate from, engage these civilizations on a level of universal peace as ambassadors from Earth to their civilization. And that is really the CSETI purpose. That is the purpose of the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, is to not only establish that philosophical and geopolitical, if I might say so, foundation, but to train people to actually become those ambassadors. And the reason that is so important is because of this crisis that's evolved since the 1950s, since about the time I was born, ironically, or perhaps purposefully, I don't know. You can speculate on that, but is that about the mid-1950s, I was born in 1955, when the Rockefeller Commission reorganized the Department of Defense and the CIA. They basically took the work of this covert group called Majestic and made it so that it operated outside of the direct oversight and control of the president or the Congress. And what little existed during the Eisenhower years was virtually gone by the time President Kennedy took office. And certainly by the time Nixon took office, it began to operate totally as a satellite entity where there was really absolutely no control or oversight, and in many cases not even any knowledge. For example, both Presidents Carter and Clinton and people I know who worked with them have affirmed to me, including the CIA director for President Clinton, that inquiries into this subject and into these programs resulted in them being basically lied to and told to buzz off, and they were not told a thing. So what this has created is an unacknowledged crisis and a sort of a silent coup d'etat that began in the mid-1950s and which has resulted in the government of the United States and the government of every other country, never mind the United Nations, being unable to get information on this or to launch an appropriate global diplomatic initiative. And this is really important to contemplate, is that, here we are some 50, 60 years into the modern era of massive and increasingly open contact between our civilization and these extraterrestrial civilizations, and there's no coordinated, sponsored governmental entity that's legal and that answers to the people doing this. And this is why in 1990, I formed CSETI to do this, because I realized, having known about this subject since I was a child, that no one was minding the store, and the people who were minding the store, this sort of clandestine and rather rogue covert group, which has been called Majestic, basically operates as a satellite government unto itself and answers to nobody, and has made a mess of things, frankly. And that the governments of the world and the United Nations have completely either been shut out or have decided not to deal with this issue for fear of retribution from Majestic. And so for that reason, we have a situation where these extraterrestrial civilizations are calling us in many different ways, and no one's been answering the call. And we're an attempt to answer that call. It's a citizens' diplomacy effort. And I tell people, if not us, who? And if not now, when? And that's why we have to do it. And we are modeling this. And I think that one of the really profound and beautiful things that have happened over the past 2 or 3 years is that a major G7 country has reached out to us, wanting us to help them understand how to make contact, and at some point make contact with them and with their head of state, with these extraterrestrial civilizations, to enable them to catch up on the lost 55 years or 54 years that we've had since all these things became too clandestine and were snatched away from the legitimate oversight and control of the people's governments and representatives around the world. And this particular government, we have met with their senior officials. We have gotten a letter of commitment to do this from their Ministry of Defense, and we're waiting to see if their head of state is wanting to forge forward. We do know that, of course, they're watching to see what President Obama does about this issue, if anything. And I have told them I would not hold my breath for any U.S. leader to take this issue on, because I think the United States is the crown jewel of classified projects dealing with this. And most U.S. presidents have been too intimidated to try to take on this Majestic entity, which has fearsome capabilities in terms of retribution, but also in terms of weapon systems that are way beyond anything that the non-majestic elements within the Department of Defense or CIA have, because these are projects that are highly, highly compartmentalized, and even though they have representation in the CIA and the Pentagon, and some of whom I've met with, most of the people in those big agencies don't know about this, and usually the President of the United States and the House Intelligence Committee chairman and the Senate Intelligence Committee, many of whom I personally have briefed, don't have any access to these projects and don't know about them. And if they know about them, they only know a little bit, and they certainly don't control them. So this becomes a really difficult dynamic, which doesn't exist in many other countries, I might add, because the United States interest, and along with, to a lesser degree, the United Kingdom and somewhat in Canada, who have kept these things secret from their leaders, have done so very craftily, but also because there's so much money involved. There's somewhere between $100 and $200 billion a year that are going into these projects that are illegal and are part of the black budget of the United States and the United Kingdom. And what you see is that most of the people who are in government that I've met with simply don't have a handle on this. And so until this whole mess gets sorted out, and I can't say whether Mr. Obama will take a lead in this or not, or if this G7 country will ultimately step forward without the explicit collaboration of the current president. This is all something that's literally in the last few months is being discussed, and that I've been in meetings discussing this. But what I do know is that each of us can become an ambassador to the universe and can become somebody who understands the principles of transdimensional reality, of interstellar civilizations, the wisdom that is needed, the knowledge that's needed, the techniques in consciousness and in thought, and then step into the role of being a citizen diplomat, knowing full well that none of us are appointed by anyone and we have no official standing. I don't want any official standing. I don't need it, frankly, and neither do you. And this is what I tell people. I said many times people sit back and sit on their hands waiting for an authority figure to say, you can do this. Well, if you need an authority figure to say you can do this, I'll be the authority figure for you and say, go do it. Because we're running out of time to have the sort of slow-moving gears of government and bureaucracy to do it. And I think it's very important that people all over the world understand that these extraterrestrial civilizations are very willing to interact with contact groups that understand why they're here, to do this in a non-prejudice and non-fearful way, who understand the sciences of transdimensional reality, not only the physical and electromagnetic sciences, but the sciences in consciousness, remote viewing, and what we call coherent thought sequencing, where you then vector and guide these craft onto a site using thought. And I think that if you understand these principles and you're willing to do it with a clear intent, a pure heart, and with the purpose of making peaceful contact to further both the relationship between humans and these extraterrestrial civilizations, but also for the purpose of, within consciousness, creating a powerful morphogenic field where the potential for universal peace and for justice and for these new civilization to emerge on this planet, that's where it first gets fertilized, is within the field of human consciousness. And that's why it's so important that we come together and do these things together, and because it's within that state that real change ultimately originates. That's the originating source of change, is within thought and consciousness.
It's really an honor to be a part of CSETI and this group that is creating this morphogenic field, universal morphogenic field, and really doing something to help make huge changes in the world.
Oh, yes. And, and Dr. Bob John at Princeton University, was professor emeritus of engineering there, said that in his studies using thought and consciousness on, say, random number generators or robotic systems, that if there was one person who did it, it had a certain effect, that the conscious thought, that someone thinking to a device or to a machine would have a certain effect on it that was measurable. But if two people did it that were unified or who loved each other, it was exponentially greater. Imagine what might happen at Rio Rico in Arizona starting on the 24th of October when we have 200 people in that state of consciousness doing this. It doesn't matter if we see anything in the sky. I tell people that's secondary. What's primary is that people in that state of consciousness with that intent, making contact, and then doing this transformative meditation for the earth all together from a deep level of cosmic mind will have an enormous effect. And so that's really how change happens, and that's why it's so exciting. I mean, I have to say, we have never, in the 19 years that we've had CSETI, done anything like this for 3 days and 3 nights out under the stars with 200 people. I mean, I think the largest groups we've done have been just like a day group with 80 or so. And this is going to be quite an interesting experiment, and I'm very excited that this is going to be happening here just in the next week or so. And I hope some of you can attend. And if not, I hope to see you at the Costa Mesa event that we're doing in Orange County. And Linda has the
November 13th and 14th.
I'm sorry?
It's November 13th and 14th, a Friday and Saturday. The 13th is a lecture, and the 14th is a workshop.
Right, and then I think on the 15th we start the week-long CSETI training up in Joshua Tree.
Yes.
That will go from the 15th to about the 21st.
To the 21st.
Yes, and that's wonderful because it's a small group that we, like I said, about 40 of us that go up into the Joshua Tree National Park every day, and that's where we've had so many of these amazing events happen over since 1996, when I think Linda, on your first trip
right.
there, we had this massive disc-shaped Hershey. It looked like a Hershey's Kiss that fully materialized in the sky and came straight down and lit up the entire desert, and then without any sound merged into the desert and went into this landing site that we now use as our contact site, where we've had so many amazing things happen. And we will be doing that in November, in about a month actually now. And so
right, and we never fail to have amazing things happen everywhere we go. But Joshua Tree, wonderful things all the time.
So if you want to find out about all those, it's at cseti.org/contact for the Rio Rico, Arizona event. It starts on October 25th, and at cseti.org you can find about these other week-long and day-long training events, because we think that the more people who get trained, and our goal is to have thousands of ambassadors trained from all over the world. We have people coming from Norway and Australia and all over the world for this event, that they go back to their homes, to their home country or state or wherever they're from, and they then begin to practice this, and they form contact groups, and it creates this shift in consciousness that then brings with it the whole world, and maybe eventually even our political leaders, who are kind of lagging indicators. You know, they talk about the unemployment rate being the lagging indicator for the economy. I'm afraid to say our political leaders are always the lagging indicator of society. They are seldom real leaders. I would tell you that all of you listening to this are the leaders, and our leaders that we talk about in Washington and elsewhere, if we lead, they'll follow. And so we need to be the leaders of our leaders in that sense. And I think that people need to understand that. I think we take way too passive an approach to this, and we need to be empowered both individually and collectively to see ourselves as the sort of transformative agents to bring forward a whole new era of life on Earth. And that's why we're calling this new book and DVD that's coming out this week, Contact Countdown to Transformation. And we're in this final countdown to transformation of life on Earth. And it's really an exciting time to be on this planet and to be working together.
It's an exciting time for us, and it's exciting because the ETs are working with us.
Oh, there's no question. We never have one of these events happen where there's not some clear and demonstrable contact that happens, where the ETs make it very clear they're with us and working with us. And in fact, recently we found out that there was a pilot who saw basically our logo, the CSETI triangle, which is 3 circles together. There were 3 ET craft in a formation over Rio Rico.
Right.
That was just reported in the last few weeks. And it was precisely in the location over where we're going to be doing our contact starting on the 24th of October. And this simply cannot be a coincidence. And by the way, this is not a report that came from someone on our team. This was someone who, a civilian and a pilot who knows nothing about our operation and knew nothing about the fact that we were going to have this conference.